Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, joining from the world. My name is Ramesh. I lead business operations at Atomicwork. I am very excited to join all of you today for our next masterclass session in the Agentic ITSM Masterclass. I have very special guest with me. He's a friend of Atomicwork. We've worked with him over the last 6 months. He was also one of the earliest partners we signed up, and since then, I think we've done a lot of work together. And he's also played a big part in like helping us improve our product and do a lot more with our solution. I'd like to introduce all of you to John from CascadeClarity. Hi, John. How are you today? And thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ramesh. Thanks for the introduction, and nice to have everybody on board so we can talk about the employee experience and how Atomicwork solves some really tricky problems that have been around for at least all of my career, and that's about 30 plus years in this space. So good to be
Yeah.
here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear from you. So let me pull up our presentation for the day and let's go. All right, the floor is yours, John.
Well, like I said, hi everyone. I am the CEO and founder of CascadeClarity Group, and I've spent almost 3 decades in HR business process automation with software, with Seeker software, a platform I built, as well as Sync HR. We now focus on management consulting and enterprise AI integration, and we'll talk a bit about that as we go through. Nice to meet everyone.
Right.
I covered this slide that we focus on the intersection between HR, IT, and finance, and employee experience, and how this new technology evolution is allowing us to solve problems that were very tricky, continue to exist in all enterprises at various levels, and has been a focus to try to reduce the friction that's involved in these onboarding, offboarding, and movement processes. And we'll go into detail here as we get through the slide deck.
Right.
I could talk about this. So, one of the important things that we all as enterprises have to handle is the complex system and process orchestration of onboarding. It actually starts with the initial phase of request for a new hire. And as we all know, there's been various attempts to automate this, but where it ends up is in emails and Slack or Teams messaging to coordinate the authorizations. Then the process goes into a requisition type of application, that process, and eventually has to touch quite a few onboarding applications that serve the business and the employee. So that's the joining side. Obviously, the move side is a little more subtle, and that's typically provided and facilitated from intranets and what leads actually to emails and forms as well. And then ultimately, you have the leave process. So we're going to talk detail. We have some flow charts here that we're going to review in detail, and the nuances are profound, and the impact to the business and the C-suite and the ability to see the current metrics of the business in real time are challenged, in addition to security challenges, and we'll touch on that.
All right. I think before we jump to the flow chart, I believe we have a poll that we want to run for everyone to pick their brains on what they think about the current state of affairs. So let's cue that up. As we, wait for these responses, John, I think this is a very fascinating, challenge and problem that I face myself. So I'm one of the early employees here at Atomicwork, and I've had the privilege of doing a little bit of HR, IT, and finance, and at different stages of our growth. And it's one thing to do it when you're just a couple of people in a room. You can just talk to each other and like hand over these tasks, without really any disruptions. But doing them at scale is quite a different challenge. So I'm very eager to see, what you've seen in your experience and how you would design it yourself.
Yeah, that's a good segue. So, at scale, one of our early accounts was Dell Computer Corporation. So that's a sizable organization, spans the globe, and it's fascinating to see the inner workings of an organization of that size, uh, dealing with movements, transfers, location changes, promotions, and so that's the movement part of this problem. And the reality of it is that those types of transactions took on the average of 30 days to complete. So you can imagine that the state of the business in terms of its analytics and what the headcount was, what the distribution of folks were across the globe was always inaccurate, which created friction with respect to making strategic decisions around the business. With this kind of automation, you can bring that down into less than a day. And so the impact of something like that is profound because now you have the ability to see the metrics and the state of the business in real time and understand what's going on. And so you'd be surprised that even medium-sized companies and larger companies don't really have a great visual lens into a real-time state of the business.
Okay. I think I'm eager to see your detailed flow diagram, so please walk us through it.
Yeah, this is great. So I've been alluding to this, and it applies to many employee-based processes. This is the onboarding process, and I think the first thing to understand what you're seeing here is the different swim lanes, and that's there for a reason, right? So I've got the hiring manager on top. I've got HR, ops, a business partner, and systems, and below that, I've got IT support, and then I've got finance, FP&A support at the bottom. And I don't want to go too fast on this chart before we talk about that kind of concept that you're seeing here on these swim lanes. And we all have these organizations. And the reality of it is that the organizational structure makes it so that the communication between these structures, these organization structures, is going to be via email, via Slack, via Teams. Email threads capture the history of what's going on. And so I think we all have experienced that. I think that besides that fact of the swim lanes, right? So hiring manager, I focused on sales here. I got the HR swim lane. I got the IT support swim lane. I got the finance swim lane. In addition to that, the systems that support these groups are also targeted for those groups, right? So HR will have a HRIS system, it'll have an applicant tracking system, it'll have a learning management system. There's a variety of HR systems that are in play here. HR ops and business part systems are the folks that have to extend out into the enterprise and facilitate these transactions. And so there's a group of folks in that swim lane that support the HR operations. Then, of course, you have IT, which has identity management, access control, and a variety of other employee productivity suite applications they support. And by employee productivity suite, I mean the email applications, the chat applications, of course, the identity management system itself, which is actually responsible for access to all other systems in the organizations, whether that's Salesforce or HubSpot or other CRM tooling. And so that's IT support's role here. And then finance has their own, right? Not just the GL and the finance, but also FP&A is a big function, financial planning and analysis. And what happens in FP&A, obviously, is the year planning process that goes on when we all get around at the C-suite level and decide how we're going to meet our objectives for the new year. And so in that system, and there's a variety of those, many times it's in spreadsheets, is the staff plan, is what's going to happen in the organization. And so that's fairly static and it gets kind of sealed in the beginning of the year and then we go. The issue, though, is that the organization lives and breathes. And what I mean by that is people will come, there's work events, people will leave the organization, people will transfer the organization. So whatever that FP&A plan was at the beginning, it's difficult to keep it up to date. And so off we go. Sales has a requirement to hire a salesperson. They initiate the hiring process. They get authorization. Is that in the staff plan? They're communicating with FP&A. And of course, it's in the staff plan. We just had that discussion. That's in the email thread. You can visualize that. Oh yeah, that's right. But no, this is not required. Well, that's because Joe left. This is a backfill, and so that term starts floating around. Eventually, this orchestration gets into an authorization, and there's an email there to approve the requisition, and off we go. So then we fill that out, and then we make some HRs involved in this thread. And so they say, okay, well, here's the location, and it's new backfill, and they start tracking some stuff, and it gets approved. And then off we go, and then it gets into the applicant tracking system, and hiring managers involved, and there's a recruiter and some filtering, and then at the end, the candidate is sourced. There's an agreement, an offer letter is created. HR ops is working on this, background checks. There's a variety of activities. This is actually location based. In other words, what I mean by that is it's regional, right? US might have these things, E-Verify. If you're in another country, it's some other things. Benefit selections is also a regional or location issue. But eventually, you kind of get all this together, and then you update the HRS payroll and benefits application. And then you communicate to the next swim lane, IT and support. And so that's typically through an email. Somebody needs to create an ITSM ticket in the ITSM system, whether that's Atlassian or some other product. And then that gets kind of coordinated. And then finally, there's a set of IT functions from HR, hardware provisioning. Then you update the identity management Active Directory, update the employee productivity suites, do some fixed asset tracking, configure the mobile device management component of identity management, and you're kind of done. And somehow in all that, FP&A got some verification that this was changed or this was updated, which actually doesn't happen. So that is pretty much, and I think those are on the call that have been in some component of any of these swim lanes, has either experienced this as a hiring manager or been in IT and have seen the ticketing system and how that transaction occurs, or been an employee themselves that have been hired. And then, of course, what happens there is sometimes these things work. You're asking for help. Wait, I didn't get this. I didn't get that. Sometimes it's fairly seamless, rarely for the employee. And maybe someone on this call is seeing this from the finance side. So I'll talk about another thing, but that is just the onboarding itself, which
Yeah.
is quite extensive with various systems, people, data, process.
So, John, I think on paper this looks quite complicated, right? And if you do not have the right kind of systems and tooling in place, it can really go crazy, and so many people can be lost in the process, both the employee and your internal support teams. I know you've also spent a lot of time trying to design these processes hands-on, in solutions like Atomicwork. So, would you be interested in sharing some of that with our audience today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, our background in business process automation really took off when we started to use, the internet and forms-based and very sophisticated security and workflow models to distribute application data like this that was structured. And so we have had success. The difference today from then is that you can use a natural language interface to communicate this and use AI infrastructure to coordinate the workflows in a much more sophisticated way. And that does a very profound thing. It takes the world of kind of application speak out and puts it into natural language speak. And that's a big deal because most systems, all form-based systems, all structure-based systems are built for people that use applications, whether, typically admin, but those that are doing their job on the front end like to work with natural language. So it's another, if you say, here's a form, fill this out and give me all this data, it's another application interface that's on top of their job. And so it starts to fail. And what happens is everyone backs into emails, natural language, Teams, Slack, natural language. And so that's the way we work as humans because it's easier, it gets done. It just takes longer. People need to respond. Somebody's out. I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for that. And the lack of structure prevents an audit trail for what happened, why it happened, that can be read later and learned from. And so this process, although we have attempted over 25 plus years in automation from onboarding to manager self-service to offboarding to automated benefits enrollments, it's very cumbersome because of the reality that it's still an application interface. It's a browser, but it's still a form. I'm looking at the form. I don't understand what it's asking me for. The help text is not useful. And so I say, forget it. I'm just going to write to Betty in benefits, or I'm going to send this over to my friend in FP&A and get the support I need to get my job done. And that's the reality of today, even with the evolution of great technology like internet network distribution of applications via a browser. It's still broken, and it's not that it's broken, it's just that we go back to what's comfortable to us, and that is natural language. Let me send a message and communicate and get the job done. And really, when you think about the organization, its efficiency is based on those that know how to handle these messages and get it done quickly. And so there's a certain amount of performance acuity, I should say, by handling this stuff. And so it does work pretty well. The challenge is that it takes a long time. So I wanted to set that stage and why Atomicwork and Agentic AI infrastructure, AI first, can help. So that's kind of a feel for what's going on in the enterprise.
All right. So would you like to show us, some of these things that you've built
Yeah,
now?
let me show you just some things we've demoed for our customers, and let's see here. And this is a very simple process, but you know, it's as simple as interfacing with either voice or with texting in Teams to the Atom agent and saying, "Hey, help me onboard Marina Sparkles," And so Atom goes and sets up the request and says, "We received your request." It creates a ticket, and so that's now trackable and auditable and in Atomicwork. It goes. I'll show that interface in a minute. I wanted to give you a sense of the transaction here from the hiring manager's experience. Your request was approved. We routed it to Amy Butler, and this is important, right? I think the adoption of sophisticated AI and agents in the enterprise right now is a little concerning for most. They want human in the loop. Now, whether that's required or not depends on the observability of the routing and the things which Atomicwork provides. But Atomicwork also provides the ability for humans in the loop to gatekeep. And so here you see Amy Butler approving that. I'm approving it. She has all the information, and off they go. And then I'll show you the formation of the workflow itself. The idea here, though, is that it continues to go into the process. And so now I've switched over to the Atomicwork user interface, and I'm showing the history of that, the instantiation of the ticket. Amber Butler has approved it. She's provided some additional specific HR information. It's gone over to IT. This is the idea of ticket list now instead of ITSM, and that interface between um, organizations via uh, uh, Slack or emails and that kind of unstructured, there is this kind of tracking of this from a workflow. There's additional IT data, roles or stuff, and that he's approved it and it goes in. So that gives you an overview of what just that process could mean, and then I'll show you the configuration. And every enterprise has its own, and we'll have other systems. But this shows a great way to take a process that's typically an unstructured, keep it unstructured, but track it and provide structure for it. And so I'll go into like some of the configurations. So now I'm more in the settings world of Atomicwork, and I'm showing I have my HR workspace, I got my IT workspace, and I have some other workspaces. And here you can see some of the forms that some of the knowledge that has been seeded with the HR workspace. I have direct report updates, employee records, health insurance enrollment, maternity leave requests, offboarding, onboarding. This is very important. The performance improvement request and handling that's another very time-consuming, multi-organizational coordination effort right there. There's the request to hire, which was the prelude to the onboarding, and then training and development. So you can add these, the employee handbook, and so that gives you a sense of, what you're getting when you upload all this unstructured information and training Atom to respond accordingly. I did want to talk a little bit about the workflow itself, and this is the configuration of it and the trigger, send for approval. And then we have a set of steps here, which is collect the form, so we put a employee, a human in the loop for that process. We've updated the HRIS system based on that data that we collected. We've sent an email notification to IT. We collect the information from IT using the form for the identity management. This is solving that problem where the unstructured information is coming over via email and Slack. We've done our part. It's the handoff. This is happening automatically and under workflow and tracked. Then we update the IDP. We updated Jump Cloud. We sent an email to the web server. So this registered the email via a skim transaction. Then the email server is updated, and then we send a welcome email. So that happens in about half a day versus all the coordination that's required. And you can add nodes and make it as sophisticated as you want, and gather the information you need. So that gives you a sense of what's possible. And then what you've done is you've taken these processes that are in that swim lane flow, and you've provided a substrate here of automation, still using natural language to coordinate and tools and systems that people are used to, emails and all that. But Atom is paying attention to those and forwarding and tracking those. So that's what's really cool. And then finally, just on this, just showing some of the intake forms and some of the other information that you may want some structured form data for those that are used to it, right? Because if we go back to the swim lanes and you look at the HR business process, the HR ops folks, they're used to making sure that data is right for that. And so they still have the ability to add structured information to the flow, and that's critical. So that's what I wanted to show today to give folks a feel for how that unstructured can still be unstructured, but provide this agentic AI infrastructure to get the job done very quickly.
Thank you so much for that, John. It's clear that you've spent a lot of time in the weeds, figuring this out and setting this up for yourself and your team. So it's fantastic to know that you've been able to, reimagine, some of the traditional problems that people go through and come up with far better solutions for them. Let me go back to screen sharing and your deck. So I know that's another part of this flow where it's not just about onboarding. It's about the end of the employees life cycle at the organization, right? So how would you go about doing something like this?
Yeah, I do want to touch on the other side, which is the offboarding or the termination. And because I've spent so many years in the space, I think what's important to understand is that there are two flavors of termination, voluntary and involuntary. And voluntary is a bit more simple and can be done um, fairly quickly. Even, obviously today it's done fairly quickly, but the employee can initiate that. They do, obviously, it's voluntary. They're leaving. And so they'll let somebody know, usually their manager, and then the manager tries to save that person if they're worth saving. And so there's some dialogue. But the reality of it is that it goes fairly quickly. It goes to they acknowledge the resignation. Then you start having to coordinate some important transactions. You've got to coordinate the payroll and the settlement, depending on the location of the country you're in or around the world, what those rules are. That stuff can all be ingested and maintained in Atomicwork for proper compliance with that. And then finally, of course, there's the IT team and the disabling of access, which is critical. Now, keep in mind, I'll use the same picture here for involuntary, but I also want to touch on leave and leave management. So the same idea happens with leave, right? Where you have rules around the world, paternity leave, maternity leave. I was just talking to a gentleman who had some extended paternity leave, and he lost all access to it. So he works for Indeed. And, we were working with them, and, he says, well, John, I don't have any of my access. I feel disconnected. And I say, well, that's actually regulated. You're supposed to, when you're on leave, not be engaged with the company because there have been suits where, well, you said I was on leave, but I actually had access to my systems. And so I was actually working, et cetera, et cetera. But leave is a subtle transaction because it gets confused with time off or sick or unlimited PTO and those kinds of designations versus by statute, right? FMLA, paternity, maternity leave, and all those have implications into the structure of the organization, especially around access. What can you do when you're on leave? Is it paid or unpaid? That's a thing that gets into HR and has to be managed. So all of that actually surprisingly is done through emails and Slack to determine what kind of leave and what's going on. It's very difficult to manage. Now move it over to another country where they have their own statutes and try to think through all that, especially when the systems are distributed and some of them manage this part of the world, some of them part of that other part of the world. And so there's that complexity. So I put that in the same kind of category as termination. Leave is kind of, I'm leaving for a little bit. But then, involuntary is where it gets really challenging. And I didn't want to overcomplicate these drawings, but I did want to touch on involuntary leave, where you have a situation where there's some performance issue you want to address. And so that what precedes this is a performance improvement plan, which is HR driven in coordination with direct and second level managers to work with an individual to make some improvements. That process in and of itself is fairly laborious, tedious, requires a form, requires documentation. And that's another place where Atom has the forms and the facilities to actually track what's going on so that the analytics can be fed back into a decision process that says, yes, you have met your requirements, or no, you haven't, and we're going to proceed with a involuntary termination. Now, what's tricky about involuntary termination is that once the decision's been made, it's not typically communicated directly to the employee. And so what happens is that there's a meeting set up. The direct manager says, "Hey, why don't you meet me in a few days? I've got a topic for you. We'll spend about 30 minutes together." In that time, there can be no reduction of access of anything. The HRIS system cannot be updated. Nothing can happen because any change to access or anything alerts the employee, and then that causes a strain on the process. And so what ends up happening is there's a background coordination of the time of the meeting, and the when the termination, when the access needs to be cut, and these kinds of things. And so you'll end up with this kind of everybody on the Slack channel. Okay, I'm stepping into the meeting, and then these things will start to trickle off as this is communicating. So that's highly personal. It's highly human involved. It's back channel type of organization, and none of that becomes necessary. All of that can be removed with Atomicwork, AI, agentic flows, and that kind of orchestration. So I'm sure if anyone on this call has been in a direct manager role and has experienced that process of involuntary termination, they know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure they understand the leave and the voluntary side for that matter. So I wanted to make sure we touched on those things on the other side of leave. I won't get into all the stuff that happens in the middle, which is the movers. That's an extraordinary, challenging problem. And also keep in mind how important it is to make sure that the organization has real-time information about who reports to who and what's the distribution of folks and their roles across the organization. That actually is needed to make workflow decisions. And so it must be timely. It must be as real time as possible. And that solves some really strategic issues for the business.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like there's a whole lot of complexity between onboarding and exits. And I think we'll need an entire new session to cover all the details there. But I think this is a good place to start. So I think the big question is, John, this is on everybody's mind, and every organization is different. And I think people keep, complaining about platforms. And I think when you
Yeah.
invest in platforms, you sometimes realize that, the challenge might be with your team and the way they operate. So how do you see this? What is the best way to tackle challenges like these at scale?
Yeah, it's not a people problem, and it's actually not a platform problem. It's a process problem. It's a structured problem, and the reality of it is we haven't had the right technology to solve the problem, and there needs to be a smarter technology, and it's been evolving over the last couple of years that allows people in the organization to communicate in natural language and still have all that structure that a platform can produce. And what I mean by structure, I mean that literally structured data, workflows, et cetera. But let's go into the platform problem. Just why isn't it a platform problem? The reason it's not a platform problem is that the platforms are designed to serve the organizational unit. If you look at whether it's a Workday or any of the myriad of HRS systems, they're built to service HR. They try to do these types of movements, but they aren't very good at distributing out to the sales team and the CRM team. Anytime someone has to get in there, it's another task for them to get in there and do that work. And so it just doesn't work. Of course, IT has their system. That platform is geared toward identity management and the administration of it, the administration of access, not to distribute access and enable that. And of course, the CRMs, et cetera, et cetera. So the platforms are organizational based. The people aren't the problem. They're the ones actually doing the work between the platforms, and they are the solution to the current state. But it's a lot of work on them to do that. And there's no way to take out the time factor it takes to flow this unstructured information. So it's not necessarily um, people. Today, we have a new, I don't want to call it a platform. I would just call it a new technical infrastructure to support natural language communication, bringing unstructured information into a structured process. And that right there will solve this, will help solve this problem. So it fits in between people and platform. That's how I see it.
Okay. And I think what would be really useful for everyone listening in is, if you can share some directional, takeaways that they could, consider to improve their existing systems and improve their existing processes, right? So, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, the fascinating thing about all of this is that every organization has the information. It's just in unstructured places like emails and Slack and team messages. So there is information about workflows there. That information, that unstructured information, can be ingested and provided to seed an agentic platform like Atomicwork. And so, to me, that's the first thing, is to make sure that your org information is up to date, your reports to is up to date. Seed the platform with knowledge of how to flow, and then use that and start to automate from there.
All right. So I think I know you already showed us a bunch of these things, in your
Yeah.
working demo. Uh, do you see a world where, all of these, complex challenges, that can they truly be automated completely with agentic solutions? Where do you feel, there needs to be a human in the loop, and how can we, continue to make sure there's empathy and, goodness in the process while we also focus on automation?
Yeah, I think this is a critical slide. Everything that I described earlier, I've now replaced with facilitating Atom agents, facilitating the process. I've previously added some human in the loop, which everybody will be more comfortable with at certain junctures of this. When I look at this picture, what I see is speed, velocity. That's what's getting improved. A reduction in labor, a reduction in divinity of those involved in the process. So more accurate, transactional, and higher velocity, which means at the C-suite level, and at the C-suite level, you get better metrics to run the business. You know what's going on, and better security, all that's tightened up and quicker, and a better employee experience. So when I look at this, I see velocity improvements and a reduction in just workload. That's what that says to me.
Okay, I think I want to use this opportunity to ask our audience again, what they think, because we've talked about a bunch of things so far. I want to make sure everybody's been following it up until this point. So let's queue up the next poll. I'm glad this is a multiple choice question, to be honest, because I feel like taking all of them.
Yeah, me too. That's how I feel too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think while people vote, I think I want to be mindful of time. I think let's go ahead. Uh,
Okay,
let's talk about the next improvement. Yeah.
gotta get rid of this. Is in my way. Okay. Um, well, like I said, this is happening anyway. So regardless of this new technology advance, what is occurring in the organization is um, communication via Slack team. So the ability to have structured response is a breakthrough, is a real game changing event here, right? Because the behavior is already there. It's just that there's not quite the intelligence behind all this messaging going on. So I think I demoed it earlier with the Atom when I showed it in Slack. You can talk to it, and that's the idea here: is that employees have different roles, managers, recruiters. They all have a different need a different virtual response. So I think this is kind of baked uh, into the uh, into the Atomicwork structure and the evolving agentic AI world here.
Yeah, I think the idea of a virtual buddy, I've been a buddy for a bunch of people, when they join
Sure.
Atomicwork or in previous organizations, right? And while I really enjoy the human aspects of it, sometimes you just need access to someone who's always there. You want to message them in the middle of the night, asking, "Hey, how do I go about doing this?" And I think where AI solutions like Atomic Work really, step in is while you can continue to have those human interactions, high quality conversations at work, really have those collaborative sessions. It will not put out the fire in the middle of the night, and when you need to get something done urgently, I don't think you should be looking for, the right subject matter expert in like 1,000 employee organization, right? So I'm glad we are able to tackle this problem well too. Uh, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, this is a good one. I showed it in the configuration of the workflow. The information that's gathered on employees is obviously sensitive. And so some of that you want to have the HR business ops provide it. And so there is a requirement for humans in the loop. And you know, what's happening in this new world is that humans are becoming more of the observers and the kind of the gatekeepers of those non-human actors. So critical component, we demonstrated it in the demo that we did.
All right. I think let's bring it home, John. I know we've covered a bunch of things. We've spoken about automation. We are talking about how, it's important to, keep the human in the loop, and continue to be empathetic. I think thank you so much for sharing so many of these, improvements and suggestions on how people can design their own processes and tools. But if you want to leave everyone with maybe three takeaways, or three things that, they should really think about, as they are building towards the future, what would they be?
Well, one is the importance of efficiency and velocity in these processes. They take too long currently today, which throws off the business. So keep in mind how important it is to improve these processes from a velocity standpoint. Number two, will always be required to observe, guardrail, and do all the things that is done today, but more of at that observer role versus the transacting role, and then providing information on how to improve the process. And three, ultimately, this is about bringing the organization, the company together and lowering the barriers across these organizational structures. That is critical for enterprise AI to take hold. Everyone has to get on board and be a part of the new world. And so that would be my last one.
All right. I think great points. Thank you so much, John. I think before we wrap up, I want to make sure we take some questions because I've been getting these Zoom pop-ups over the last 10 minutes. I've been trying hard to not get distracted from, your presentation. So let me go off screen and let me read out these questions for you and the rest of our audience. We have four now. Great. Uh, I think the first question is from Eric. Eric says, given that JML processes often need to be tailored per country due to local policies and applications, how can organizations avoid fragmented processes and instead build a unified, cost-effective approach? And is tool and process standardization a necessary starting point?
Yeah, localization is a big deal. I call it localization, which is the regional differences across the world. Atomicwork has invested in the ingestion of regionally specific, location specific policies, and so that's a good start. I mean, how do you know what to apply? You actually have to know where the employee is in the location. That data has to be accurate. So if the velocity is not fast and people are moving around and you're not capturing and you can't look at a system that has actual employee to location information that's up to date, you can't fix it. That's why I go back to the fact that velocity matters here. It has to be fast. There has to be a system of record that knows where that employee is and what you're transacting on. Because the information about policy and what it is available, can be ingested, can be applied to the transaction, but you have to have that structured information. So it's not a one size fits all. It's actually different. Every localization, every region will have its own. What you do need is consistent structural information about the employees across the organization. And to do that, it can't be point in time. Hey, we got it right. And it drifts. It can't happen like that. It's right now, and when people move, it's very tight and happens in half a day, and it's still right. So if it's right today, it's got to be right 3 days from now. You solve that problem, you'll solve what you just described. It'll work.
Cool. Thank you. Uh, we have 6 questions. I think we have time to take a couple more. So let me, pull up something. Okay, yeah, I think this is from an anonymous attendee. For companies that are starting out with process improvement, where do you recommend they begin? Should it be onboarding, offboarding, or somewhere in the middle? And why?
Got to be on. It has to be onboarding. You have to onboarding touches everything. So you have to get that experience underneath your belt of touching multiple systems, working across these organizations. I had the swim lanes in the beginning. It's critical that the enterprise start to understand what it means to work across these swim lanes, these organizations using Agentic AI, Atomicwork like technology. Once you've solved that, it gets a lot easier because it really is a living, breathing problem. They come in, they move around, and they go out. It's the way I see it. They come in, they move around, they go out. If you can get the coming in part and have all that infrastructure, have the lines of communication open across organizational boundaries, the rest will flow. You'll have a great model.
Okay. I think even more questions flowing in, but we are already over time. So let's do this. I think we'll take one more, and I think I'll work with you offline, John. I think we'll figure out an answer for a bunch of these. I think we'll post them on LinkedIn, and probably send it out to all of the attendees too. So one last question. So someone says you made a really interesting observation. People abandon structured forms and fall back to email and Slack because natural language is easier. But natural language is also where things get lost, misinterpreted or untracked. So how do you get the best of both without forcing people back into forms that they really hate?
Yeah, you can't force them back into forms. That's not going to happen. Natural language will be there. There is structured requirements, and I kind of showed that in there where I said, hey, here's an HR intake form, right? There are going to be components of this information that's structured. Compensation. Who gets to put compensation in there? Not everyone in the organization, maybe the direct manager. That stuff's been negotiated. It's in an offer letter. It can be ingested, but the reality of it is you want to at least verify that. And so you have this human in the loop to evaluate this structured data. So it's a combination. The communication of the information is natural language. The flow is being tracked. That's structured. And sometimes you need form data. But the people that are used to doing form data are the people that are used to doing form data today. They're the HR ops or the IT ops or the ticket folks. And so it's limited now. It's not the entire organization communicating. It's
Yeah.
limited to that critical information. That's how I see it. So most of it is natural language, but there are critical parts that stay form data.
Cool. Great answer. We have more questions, John, but I think we are already 5 minutes over. So I think thank you so much for doing this, and thank you
Sure
everyone
thing.
for joining the call. So we will share a recording to everyone who attended the session or even registered for the session, and we'll also make sure we find some more time with John, to answer these questions offline, and probably publish a guide somewhere. Before I let all of you go, I would love to show you, a sneak peek into some of the things that we are building in Atomicwork. I think John already did a fantastic job of like showing you real life examples of how he built it himself. But I think there's a lot more to Atomicwork, and I would really love to play a quick video for all of you. But thank you once again for joining.
Hello there. I'm Adam, your friendly specialist from LeftShift. How can I help you today?
I need your help adding dates to this Excel sheet.
I can definitely help you with that. It would be much faster if I could see your screen to guide you through adding dates to your Excel sheet. Would you be open to sharing it? Would you like to add another date in cell F6 or perhaps in a different row? Absolutely. There's a neat trick for that. If you look at the bottom right corner of cell F5, you'll see a small green square. That's called the fill handle. Just click and drag that square downwards to the cells where you want to add more dates. It will automatically fill them in for you.
All right. That's a wrap, folks. Thank you, John, once again for doing this. I think it has been fantastic to have you with us. We should really find some more time to do this again. I feel like 45 minutes isn't really enough to cover all the, the messy, beautiful, parts of, IT and HR working together. But I look forward to hosting you again for one of these sessions.
Thanks for having me, Ramesh. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everyone.